Welcome. Thank you for watching. Good to have you here. Welcome to the second Equity Special Edition. First edition that was recorded with John Carnegie as a podcast, I will put in the show notes. If you would like closed captions and you're using a Chrome browser, you can go to Advanced Accessibility and Live Captions if you've not already activated them. You might need to restart your browser, but then whenever you come back to your Chrome browser and there's any video on Facebook or Twitter, anything you've got on the screen for YouTube, it will close caption it for you. It's a nice little tool. I have guests. I have two guests. I have Avyianna Snow and Helen Fox. Avyianna, introduce yourself.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. My name is Avyianna. I'm an actress and I've been an equity member for about 10 years.
Hi, I'm Helen Fox. I'm also an actor, a writer and a producer for theatre. And I've been in equity, I'm just going to say a long time. I've got no idea. And I had a different name when I first joined. So a long time.
And
I'm based in London, I should have said, sorry.
Yeah, and you're based?
I'm based in South West Scotland.
And I'm based in the East Midlands. I'm Karen. I'm stage manager, creative producer, and podcast and live streamer. And here we are today to talk about the rule change referendum and give a bit of context. So equity members will have received this through the post. This is the biannual magazine. Along with that document, you will have got to your diary, and you will also have received a referendum ballot paper and a booklet that asks you to vote. So this little show really is about what's in that booklet. You've never heard anything about the equity referendum rule change. What is it? And hopefully give you a bit of context that will help you cast your vote. So where shall we start? Avyianna.
Would you like to look at the statement in approval, or should we go through the booklet from the beginning? Or It begins with a letter from the General Secretary.
So people can see what we're looking at. There it is on screen.
Yep. So the first page is the letter from the General Secretary, sort of explaining the new rulebook, setting out what it is. The Council urges you to vote yes to the proposed new rulebook and timetable. And you can return your ballot either by post or online. And then we have the statement in approval, urging you to vote for it. And on the next page, the statement in disapproval, urging you or giving you the reasons to vote against. So I suggest we look at the statement in approval. Oh, sorry, there's also a summary of substantive changes.
So what does it mean? What do we mean by substantive changes?
Changes to the gravamen of the rules themselves.
And then there's quite a few of those. And there's quite a bit of that. So we'll see what we can cover. And then come into the end. There we go, we're at the end. So we're going to flip back to the top. And yeah, we're going to go through these. So the rule change. Helen, can you give a little bit of a insight into what exactly is going on? What are we voting on? What's happening?
Yeah, sure. So Council and staff have come together to reorganise, reword, reintroduce rules in order that it is the present rules that we have are very complicated in their wording. They are very complicated in their formation because motions have been layered upon motions, and where they are connected to each other has become quite confused. And the law has changed, which means there are certain things that we now require to be in our rules that are not in our rules. So it's really important that we keep an up-to-date rule book, which is approachable by all of our membership and clearly sets out what the contract is between the members and the union itself. And that's what this is for.
And Avyianna, the rule book, the thing that we are changing, going from the existing rules that are going to change and this new set of rules that we're going to look at adopting, why why is it going to the membership? Why have council and the executive just not issued us a new rule book and went, there you go, that's it?
Well, it's important with such a fundamental change. This rulebook alters the structure of the whole union and how we operate on a day-to-day basis. And with such a profound change, we have to have a referendum because it's important to involve every single member of the union in that decision. Equity has always been member-led in its decision-making, rather than having a sort of top-down situation where the very few people at the top have all the power and just sort of impose their will upon the majority. It's very important that actually the majority get a say in this.
And if, as say, in previous elections, I think members who are active in the union get a little bit frustrated at how low the turnout's out. But that is democracy. People chose not to vote. And in their position and the position where you might have a strong opinion, you still want to have the opportunity to vote. And I think that's why it's always important to vote when you have an opportunity, because it might be a last chance because people don't think that you're interested, so you don't need the vote. Because these processes aren't free. These processes cost an amount of money, and the union has to fork that out every time they have a referendum. So if they can decide not to. So
we fought very hard for the right to get a vote, didn't we? I always think the suffragettes tied themselves to railings in order for my right to vote. So we should use and exercise that right, which we're lucky to have.
So we have a letter from the General Secretary. So in the summary there, if you're reading this first page, a reformed dynamic conference, better connected to members' issues and campaigns is highlighted. New reserved council seat for women and LGBT plus members. Clearer and more transparent complaints, disciplinary and appeals processes. Provisions to improve equity's financial stability. Stronger rules to ensure equity is an independent union able to fight for equality, better pay and improved terms and conditions. So that is in the General Secretary's statement. Shall we move to the approval statement, or do either of you have anything that, should we move straight to that? We don't want to keep you here forever. So the approval statement, so these have been written by council. So who wants to start on the statement of approval? What's in it? What are we being asked? What sort of things that stand out to you?
I think
should we just go through it?
A point at a time, that makes it really much easier. I would start off by saying that I haven't met anybody in the union who doesn't think that it's really important to do a rule change, to approach this, to modernise it, to make it legal, to make it clear. And so the fact that the union is doing that is a brilliant thing. And if we go down the points, point 1, Equity will remain a professional union. It has been a trade union since its foundation in 1930. Great, absolutely pivotal. We are a union of network because of the work that we do. It's not the same as other unions. And we are a trade union in that we have to be industrially active, and that's really important. I would like to move to the second point, unless there's any disagreement with that. Point 1 being a really good thing.
No.
Well, what about the actual beginning, though? Because we've missed out, the column before that, statement on behalf of the Equity Council, because there are some points I think we should raise even in that first column.
Okay. Go for it.
All right, so I mean, I would point to the third paragraph. The council, through a rulebook working party that was formed of elected members of council, has been reviewing the union's rules for more than a year. Detailed legal advice from the barrister, the council is putting forward a new rulebook. There was a series of 8 open meetings, some in person and some online, in September 2022, at which ordinary members shared with council their thoughts and suggested amendments to the draft rules. So I would like to point out here that twice throughout this year, 2022, 11 branches came together to request an SRC to actually have a proper sort of
It's a
debate.
special representatives conference, yeah. So
that's correct.
Every year there's an annual conference, and there was a clause in the old rules that set out how a special conference or an extraordinary meeting could be called.
Yes, and we tried twice this year to call an SRC to have a proper sort of 3-day long full debate on this rule book, at which people would be able to get up and really, batter through each point. And twice that request was denied by the General Secretary. Technicalities were found with our request that meant that we were not given the SRC that we wanted. And we were told instead that we would have this series of 8 open meetings and that would replace an SRC. My feeling is that the 8 open meetings were inadequate. An SRC would have been a much better opportunity. First of all, it's elected representatives who are informed to stand up and make their points. The 8 open meetings all happened inside the same week. So if you were on holiday or on tour or something during that week, then you missed the entire thing and there was no other opportunity.
And in the daytime.
And in the daytime.
I think it's important to note as well that those who are active in the union and are branches or committees tend to have proxy consent from the people that they deal with a lot. So having a special representatives conference where people have been sent to represent them would have meant that they would get a wider opinion, because the people who were down there.
About how many people attend conference?
Well, this is several hundred attend conference, and I'd like to point out that 72 ordinary members attended those series of 8 open meetings. If you actually add up the attendance at each meeting, so 72 people is what came to these 8 open meetings. So very poorly attended, and this was taken to be that's your consultation. And then suggestions were taken from these 8 open meetings to be discussed at the council. These so then the council meeting took place on the 1st of October. Let me get the right date. It was the 4th of October. That was the council meeting, at which 132 suggestions from these open meetings were discussed. And it was only one item on a very busy, packed agenda that day. It was the final item discussed at the very end of the day when many people had already left to go and get their trains. It was discussed in about a 90-minute period. And I couldn't help but notice that is fewer minutes than suggestions. So how you could discuss 132 suggestions in 90 minutes doesn't make sense to me.
And it was those suggestions that were then the ones that were passed were then added into the final rules. And I think reading through them now that we've had access to them, it's not a lot changed, did it?
Well, the council claims that I think 42 of the 132 suggestions were accepted.
Okay. So
I believe that most of those were not changes to the actual content of the rules, but merely sort of grammatical suggestions.
So I was unable to locate 42 changes.
Yeah. So but finally the substantive changes, which we'll try and get to a few of, whatever happened from the open meetings to what you have received now, this is the booklet, this is the guide that you will need to look over, and hopefully we can give you this little bit of insight into the world that we've been inhabiting since August. So what the rest have we got on that page? Do we need to move on? Where had you got to, Helen?
Helen was talking. Did you want to go on to point 2?
Do you want to go on to point 2?
Yes. Okay. So point 2, equity will also remain a non-party political union, as it has been since its inception. And I think that is absolutely correct, because we have a very diverse membership, and nobody should be alienated from their union because of their political affiliation. But the thing I would draw anybody's attention to is that the General Secretary uses his personal Twitter account to discuss both union business and his personal party political affiliation.
He is currently, I believe, the chair of Faraday Labour Ward.
Yeah, I think
branch.
I think we should. I think that's a really good point.
I think when these things appear together, it is understandable if people misconstrue that the head of our union and his political affiliation are then entwined.
Yeah.
And that should be kept quite distinct.
Yeah.
As per the rules.
And as I say, we want to share these thoughts with you if when you're watching. Just if you're going through that first statement, as I say, and you see something that it's like, this is rule C1. The entire rule isn't listed in the substantive changes, but you are able to pop to the substantive changes and go, oh, what in section C has changed? And in the substantive changes, selection C replaces part of the rule 3, and this has been the problem, is that the rule book has been rewritten. It's not just gone through it and reformatted and changed a few words. It's a total language shift. It's a movement of some clauses have gone to other clauses. So the feeling of overwhelm that you are probably feeling when you hold this quite relatively small document, you kind of, how can you possibly come to terms and do justice to the vote that you have? And really, don't be too harsh on yourself. Look at that rule. If it needs questioning further, find someone either from the union, or if you're not, it's fine. Just go with the statements and read them to the end, because that's really the only document that you have. We'll give you a few links in the show notes if you want to have a look into some of the documents that have been created by members that have been really diving into this. I have a huge thanks to John Carnegie for some of those documents, and we'll make those available to you, so you don't have to go hunting. You could just kind of click through them. So yeah, that rule C, powers are the union's authority to act, duties are its contractual obligations. The current rule unhelpfully conflates the two. The union's duties, where they exist, are dealt with separately in relevant sections. No current powers are lost, but they are clearer and include a new general power to C19. As I say, reading this for the first time, and if this is the only document that I have context for, I'm not sure that really means much to me. Can you fill me in on any of that? Or am I? It does seem quite confusing.
I think the whole thing is entirely confusing, and from my perspective, that is a tremendous tool to disengage the membership. None of this process nor these documents have been done in such a way as to make it really clear and easy for your average busy, working, stressed creative to get engaged with it. And the union, the council and the staff keep crying that they would like better engagement, younger engagement. But unfortunately, the processes that they go through alienate all of that. They make it incredibly difficult and incredibly stressful, and people just don't engage because there's too much else going on. It's too hard.
I've been gathering resources and trying to share them to everybody who's been asking me, because although I've got an opinion, and for those that are interested, if you stay to the end, we will tell you what we're voting, but that is not what this is about. This is about us trying to look at the approved statement, give you some sort of support, and you can see our sort of discombobulation, so that you kind of don't feel that it is just you. So
Should we
I've
move
got
on
the
to
screen at the moment.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up
the
this.
next
I have
point?
some points to make about number 7 and 8.
Okay,
Yep.
so we're on statement of approval. So let's go. So I think number 3, council will have 2 additional equalities seats to ensure voices at the table and underrepresented artists in the industries. I think
Brilliant.
that is really good. The equalities need to be represented at that high level, and I think that is a great addition. And number 4, none of the current aims of powers of the unions, rules B and C respectively, has been lost, but they are clearer. But if all I'm seeing is this document, I suppose I have to take their word for it, don't I? Is that the case? At
Yes.
this stage?
Yes, absolutely. There
Okay.
has to be faith and trust, and faith and trust is built on experience, and experience is sort of what makes that quite difficult to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I felt quite alienated from this process. I mean, I'm a really strong trade unionist, and I love my union, and it fractures my soul right now to have to be making these decisions. So 5, the council as it is normal.
As is normal
Other
in most
unions,
other unions.
I would like to make reference to that, because this is something that we are increasingly hearing over and over again.
Okay, relate to us point 5. Relate to us
about other unions and how we are moving rules to be in line with other unions, or we want to have processes which are in line with other unions. But other unions are not us. They do not work like us. They do not have the same kind of issues that we face from a day to day. And to try and pigeonhole us and try and push us into a round peg in a square hole is only going to fracture the union more.
Yeah.
And I'd like to point out also on this point that always before, it was the annual equity conference, the ARC, which every year set the subscription rates. We all had to vote on it and the whole conference had to accept it. Whereas now that is another example of a power which used to be out to the people, which is now going to the council. So that means that something which would have had to go before the whole room and the council would have had to justify the decision, and there would have been a vote, it would have been more democratic. It's now that power is transferred to the council. So they can just set the rate with no reference to anyone else, without asking anyone else.
It is one of those strange inclusions, though, because for all of the time I've been at conference, and like the approval of the annual report, there's never any sense that anybody can object to it. It's
but the formality is important. People have to be asked, because then at least there's an opportunity to say, well, actually, hang on, I think whatever. But now we've lost even the opportunity to object.
I think with the standard of living crisis, we might have to increase those subs mid-year.
And you're not going to get asked your permission.
So I would like to just quote, though, it says, council deciding on subscription fees to improve the union's financial stability. To improve the union's financial stability. That takes no regard to the membership's financial stability and where we're at. We are in a financial crisis. And if the union is going to prioritise their funds over the members' funds, that's worrying. If they're going to put it up because they decide they need more money, is that going to stop ordinary members being able to engage with the union, to being able to pay their fees?
One of the things that we talked about when we've had various members get-togethers is the notion of deal breakers. And if we were looking at this document and we had exactly that thought, would this be a deal breaker that should stop you voting and supporting the union's hard work of putting together a new rule book for you to vote no? Would that subscription component be a deal breaker?
It's one of several, and it's, to me, what it represents is it's the shift in power. That's the deal breaker. It's the power being taken from the people and given to this very small 30 odd people on council. That's the deal breaker.
There are individual deal breakers that for me, I would just have to read that one and that would be sufficient to vote no. But there are a collection of so many little ones that collectively build up to be this quite impossible wall to pass as far as voting yes goes.
It's a very massive decision, isn't it? Yeah.
It's hidden amongst lots of really brilliant, wonderful things. The clearer language, the greater inclusivity on the committees, the no affiliation with any particular parties, our commitment to working class artists, and so on and so forth. And you look at all of those wonderful things and you can be blinded to the fewer but really significant and importantly negative things that are there.
Yeah, so that's so the statement of approval, you've got this document through, you're going to look at the General Secretary's statement, you taking a look at the statement of approval. Hopefully as going through these things, you might be able to skip through them and have your own consensus. It is really important that this is about your choice. You know, you've been given this vote, and whether you vote yes or vote no, it is a voice that you have. So where do we go from here on the approval statement? So that was item number 5.
That was 5.
Number 6. The General Secretary will still be obliged to carry out their duties and the policies of the Union as directed by the Council and in accordance with the rule P21.
Yeah.
So
P21 says the General Secretary shall carry out their duties as directed by the Council. And that sounds really good.
Is that
the language
that all it says?
Softened. Yep, but the language has softened from at all times act in accordance with the directions given and with the policies approved by Council. It is a much more fluid kind of language, which for me defines the position much less. And it goes on to be further softened by muddling it with J35. The Council or General Secretary shall have full authority to act on behalf of the Union in all Union matters.
As I'm just having a look at the section P substantive changes that, you know, if we're only going to look at this document, what it gives you a bit of an insight to. I've just been really worried by the if absolutely necessary and if Council deems appropriate. It just seems a little bit washy. If I wouldn't expect that to be in my contract. It's like when you have your list of duties in your contract and the last one is or duties deemed necessary by the company. I'm always kind of, well, what does that mean? What are you going to make me do? And as a stage manager who's sat on the industrial negotiations for those kind of statements, you're constantly going, no. What does that mean? Can we have a line in there where you're supposed to list those things? Because especially as a stage manager, you can really end up taking on far more than your contract pays you. And that line in the contract that deemed necessary or is appropriate to your role can be a killer. And as I say, it's never felt, with this rule change, it's never felt that my industrial representation by the union is affected. I still feel that the union, whether I vote yes or vote no, the industrial foundation of the union is solid. They're negotiating terms and conditions. They've got networks that are looking at AI. They're looking at Green Deal. They're looking at rights for women. There's parents in performance arts, how they're supporting that. They're supporting the Actors Centre with sort of the dispute they're having with the venue that they're being shifted from. So the union industrially, I feel, you know, is in a really good shape. So, let's say this approval statement. So let's go back to sort of point 6 and 7. Approval. So you're looking at this approval statement and you're trying to decide, you know, what this means. So point 6. Let's just round that off.
So I have a number of points I want to raise about 7 and 8. Have we got there yet?
Okay. Shall we? So just let us. What is 7 and 8?
So numbers. You finished. So number 7 is about reducing the number of motions at equity conference. So I would like to point out that so this ordinary members of our union will now no longer be able to take a motion to ARC. It now has to come from somebody on a committee. And I think that is a quite obvious diminution of power, again, that the ordinary member can't take a motion to the conference. There's also something about motions to conference now cannot exceed 250 words, which to me means it precludes a person from putting a significant motion, particularly, say, a rule change motion, because it's very hard to get a significant, complex idea into less than 250 words. So they're really, using every trick in the book to try and mean that you can't say anything
I don't have John Carnegie at my elbow, but I believe that was already a rule. It just wasn't written in the rule book. And this is the thing that we've got to be careful of, is that thing is, now that it's in the rules, we're just like, hold on a minute. We question
I think
that.
what's worth pointing out, though, is that council themselves can exceed 250 words with their motion, which I feel is very unfair, because it means that the power is to the council. They can say as much as they want to say, but the ordinary person must try and fit it into 250 words. So that, I think, is worth mentioning.
I would add that just because it is currently, although not written down within the rules, doesn't mean that it's something we should be keeping.
Well, exactly.
There's been lots of reference to, that's already in the rules, so why don't you like it? Well, because there's lots of things we don't like about the current rules as well. And we agree they need changing.
Yeah, and this is the point that now we've got all this information, this is the point where we're fired up to go, okay, we understand now. Can we now have the consultation where we can support and guide and be on page, as you have, because you've done 2 years of going through this, and we're just reaching this point now. I think the branch structure, this show isn't about the branch reform, but the branch reform and the annual conference are going to be intertwined. So at this point, if point 7 is something that is going to be your deal breaker, you're probably going to vote no anyway. But what we want to do in sort of the rounding up of this show, which we'll probably do another 10 or 15 minutes, if you're looking at your clocks, that there's not going to be a perfect set of rules. And these rules need to evolve, and they will evolve, and people will make propositions and motions at future conferences that will start this process again. And in 20 years' time, the union will probably be in exactly the same position, and they'll be doing a rulebook rewrite. But it needs to be an ongoing conversation, and it needs to be a conversation that those that are being asked to contribute to the conversation have all the data at hand.
I think we should be trying to create the best rulebook that we are capable of doing in the first place, rather than rushing something through and having to make many amendments year after year after year to try and correct small errors, small interpretations which perhaps were missed, because we're all human.
It's worth...
Sorry, go on, Avyianna.
It's worth mentioning that this referendum opened 2 weeks after that council meeting on the 4th of October. And the final version of the rulebook became available to the members at 5 p.m. the day before the referendum opened. So that is how quickly this has been done.
I was kind of expecting that we knew this was going to happen from when there was a rulebook change going on. But from the way that it's been sold to members, I had anticipated that we would go to the next ARC, and that would be a big part of ARC, the annual representative conference. And then there would be this sort of announced press release afterwards that the rules had changed, but it's just bang and it's happened, and it all feels sort of so sudden.
Just to draw us back to 7, it's been said that it will be much easier. There will be fewer motions to allow for more networking, social activities at conference. Great, wonderful. We are a union of network as well, so that's brilliant. But getting a motion to conference will now be harder.
But is the point of a conference networking? The point of a conference is to hear motions, I would argue. That's why I go. And, you know, it's not about let's have more.
And there has been, I mean, the motion that went to the annual conference a few years ago, which suggested that the conference be reformed and reevaluated, was proposed by the Stage Management Committee. It was something that they felt very strongly about. So that impetus for change has come from a part of the membership. But too many motions, not well formatted, people feeling that they needed to because they had one, using a voice because you have it. But that's not necessarily the reason that you should take a voice away. You should sharpen voices to encourage better motions or communication at other times, so they don't feel that they need to put something to conference. One of the things that's been said about the motions is that you can propose a motion at any time to conference, and indeed you can. But one of the powerful things about the annual conference is it's the only opportunity you get to put an idea in front of your fellow members. And I've taken motions to conference that I knew were not going to get voted on. I've taken motions to conference that have been opposed by council, but it didn't stop me being able to have my 5 minutes to propose that motion for the people on the floor to come up and debate it and say whether they agree or they disagree. And then at the end of it, there's a vote, and it either gets adopted or it gets rejected. But that process where you get to go in front of your fellow members is absolutely vital. So, yeah.
So shall we move on to point 8, which states...
Let's move on to point 8 in the statement of approval.
So it says the complaints, disciplinary and appeals processes are made stronger and more transparent. Now, I think this is blatantly a false claim, because the complaints procedure is not in the rule book. It's been removed. So how can it be more transparent when it's not even there to look at? You don't know what it is. So I'll read I1, which is the new proposed rule about complaints, and it merely states the union shall have a procedure for dealing with members' complaints. But it doesn't outline what this procedure may be.
Or where you get it from.
And, you know, as Helen has said, members can't possibly know what they're agreeing to or what they're entitled to under that rule. And it's very difficult. That, I would say, is a deal breaker. How can you vote yes to something when you don't even know what you're agreeing to?
And I think there also, Avyianna, is something that we can say to those that are watching, that voting yes or no, if you decided that you had to vote no, it's not because no rules will ever happen. I think there's, in that rule book there, that rule, it should have the name of an officer that you can contact. You know, who do you call if you need that? I mean, that really should be in the rule book, or there should be a footnote for the end to tell you where to get that from.
Well, it says that it's up to the council to decide on the procedure, but the council are under no obligation to release this procedure to the wider membership and tell them what's involved. I also want to point out proposed rules. You shouldn't have to hunt. I agree.
For the procedure.
Proposed new rules S2 and S5. This is the sort of member complaints again. An ordinary member now cannot initiate a complaint against another member. That power has been lost.
A disciplinary complaint.
Yes, that's correct. And only the General Secretary will now be able to decide on the validity of a complaint, and he will decide whether it gets forwarded to the Disciplinary Committee. So there's now one person acting as sole arbiter and judge of whether your complaint has any validity. And I think having something like that decided by only one person being judge and jury is not good enough.
Certainly that makes it stronger, but in a gatekeeping way.
One thing we don't have context for is all the full outline of rules in any other rules, whether it's in an organisation or whether it's in another union. And having that question, we've not really had the opportunity to ask that. if there's a complaint against somebody that is criminal, then I suppose you should go to the police and not involve the union, and then the union might support you in going to the police. This is the thing, as someone who doesn't deal with complaints, it's like, what would the conditions of that complaint be? I would have thought a rule book would have given me some kind of guidance to what
institutes a complaint
or no, that's a really good point. So
I also want to point out, if I might, so under the new proposals, if your complaint goes forward, you'll be put in front of 3 members of the appeals committee and 3 members of the, I think, disciplinary committee. There's 6 people now who are the people you go in front of if someone makes a complaint about you, or if you make a complaint.
Yeah, and that committee is elected with the council, isn't it? So we have elections
the point I'm trying to make is, it used to be that you went in front of the entire council, which meant that you had 30 people looking at your case, and now it's down to 6. So the General Secretary and Council seem to be arguing that this is a good thing. And I would argue, actually, it's a bad thing, because it means fewer people making that decision. So you could have your whole future decided by 6 people. So it's more power in the hands of fewer and fewer people all the time.
And that's it. So if it wasn't for active members who have really pulled these rules apart and compared them, there would be no way of really knowing what it is the foundation of these statements are. So I've just put a link on the screen, references and resources. As much as possible, I've pulled together documents that were putting them side by side, links that the union have given us. There's also the podcast that I did with John Carnegie in there. So if you want to access some of the details, you can use that. There will be links in the description too.
I would just like to add that in regard to a disciplinary complaint, staff are not included in this. And
yeah, you're right. So there's a different process for staff.
Not just that they're not included, but the rules say that the council will agree a disciplinary complaints procedure for them from time to time, which rather infers that there won't be a disciplinary procedure for staff at the point that these rules are accepted, if they are accepted, until the council get together and decide on one from time to time. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to laws, rules, the union's rights, the union's money, I don't want that in the hands of from time to time, or
it's too vague.
Without any kind of
decided in
You've
advance.
hit a nail on the head right here, and that is that we're trying to interpret what the rules mean, and a good set of rules does not have any interpretation. It will have pedantry on the implications of it against something, but it will be a situational playoff. Whereas in these situations, we can't even comprehend what the rule is trying to achieve.
Which means that there are multiple interpretations, and when there are multiple interpretations, the rules don't work.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Shall we move on to number 9?
Yeah. So number 9 is the special conferences. The rule for this.
So it used to be the case that
Sorry, as I say, it used to. You go, Avyianna. You give your insight, and then I'll.
So my Zoom is slightly lagging behind, so I keep talking over people accidentally. Sorry. No, so it used to be the case that the members themselves could call a special representative conference if enough people got together. It was a very important mechanism. So if there were enough people with a sort of common cause or common purpose, something they wanted to examine, there was a mechanism in the rule book which allowed, it had to be, I think, either 11 branches or something like, is it 1% of the membership? I can't quite remember off the top of my head, had to, if you all put in the request at the same time, if there were enough of you, the members themselves could call a special representative conference. We tried to do it twice this year, and both times we were rejected. But they've now gotten rid of that power. So now only the council can call a special representative conference. So I think it's just yet another example of the power shift.
Yeah, there was a contention that the rule as it was written didn't work in the way we thought it worked when we tried to call a special representative conference. But I see that as a reason why we need to examine it, and it does need to be there. This is one of my rule breakers. This was one of my fundamental rule breakers, that as a membership of 47,000 people, that 33 people, admittedly elected by the membership, but those elections are often quite small, and those elections are often, there's many seats in there that are uncontended, so they never get voted, and either for reasons of people in that sector are really happy with the person doing that job, therefore no one stands against them, or there isn't just enough interest. But those 33 people and the 4 executives are now, it's the same mechanism for them to change the rules, for them to change everything. And now if they want to do a special representative conference because they suddenly deem they want to speak to the membership, it's within their power. There's no power there for the membership to get together and say, hold on a minute, I can see what you're doing, and actually there's a good 3,000 or 4,000 of us here that really would like to be included in this conversation. We want to put a stop or a breaker point in, or be able to just have some sort of autonomy to be able to go, hold on a minute.
I think that what we're witnessing is a closing down of any avenues for any dissenting voices to be heard, anyone with a point of view which is not the point of view of the council, and that it's important to retain a mechanism for people with a dissenting voice to be heard, an avenue you can take.
And the big voices, and it's not as if it can be just called by a few people. There was a strong mandate that you needed to find.
But there is an inference that one member could suddenly cost the union £100,000 by calling an SRC, and that's simply not the case. It says it can no longer risk an SRC being imposed on the union.
Yes,
so they're saying that a large
strange
collective of people, a large body of the membership, cannot call an SRC because we can't impose that on the membership, and yet the 35 people in council can. That seems much less democratic, much more of an
the use of the word imposed is interesting, because it suggests that, like it's not a valid claim that these are the members of the union calling for an SRC. It's not someone on the outside imposing something on you. It's the people themselves asking for an SRC.
And there needs to be a structure. I mean, the branch reform that we're about to experience and enter into on the back of this referendum, I think bringing together a larger voice, if that is what they're intended, would mean the SRC, or the Special Representative Conference, was even more relevant, because otherwise you have a powerless foundation. I think through all of this, the thing that's distressed me the most is that if I was going through a contractual negotiation and I didn't quite like some of the clauses, I would go to my union. And I can't go to my union on this because they are the union. It just feels so weird. And I feel, quite out in the open and in a vulnerable position. And this rule was kind of the thing that was the safety net for power, that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But this was a way for the collective of the union to maintain that status quo.
You expect your union to be at the forefront of everything within the industry. They should be the pioneers of what we expect the industry to enact. And I would just sort of draw that to a point that I don't think the union is becoming more accessible to everybody. I think it's becoming less accessible. It's becoming less accessible because the branch reform means that it will be much harder for people to engage with branches by virtue of distance and by virtue of capacity. So at the ARC, I requested that there was a hybrid online facility that allowed members who were perhaps on set working or overseas working, or lived rurally, or were disabled, or were carers, whatever their circumstance, money. And what was thrown at me in relation to money was, well, the union pays for you to attend the ARC, but do they pay for your childcare? Do they pay for your loss of earnings while you're there? No, they don't. So there's much more money in relation to this than they think it is. Whereas a hybrid, accessible ARC means that anybody could attend. They can turn up for a particular session where their branch perhaps, or they themselves are interested in a particular motion and would like to speak to it. It means that you're not precluded because of any of your characteristics, and you are in this situation.
Have you got the rule to hand there that says about the hybrid part? Because you used it in one of your videos. I mean, you recorded 2 videos of how you've gone through this process and what's led you to your ultimate vote, and they are really worth listening to. And of course, I will put them in the show notes.
I remember the rule. It states something about there's no onus on the council to make it hybrid unless it's not reasonably practical to hold it in person.
That's it.
That's the phrase. Reasonably practical was the phrase.
And it's like, what about reasonable adjustment for those that have?
Well, isn't it reasonably practical to assume that some people might not be able to get there in person? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that is exactly if the council considers that it is not reasonably practicable to hold it in person. And what the General Secretary said to me was that, well, people would much rather just be there in person. So,
well, but you can't make that judgment. What people? All people don't have the same.
And perhaps
opinion.
all of the people who haven't spoken to him about it and who haven't attended.
Well, that's because they're not there to attend.
Because they're not capable of doing so.
Because they can't get there to say that they can't get there. Yeah.
And there's no mechanism. The union, and this is not a present council or staff issue. This is something that's happened over a long period of time. But the union is disengaging its membership. It is making itself much harder to get involved in small or large ways. I was only able to get involved in the union 1 year ago, because up until that point, between my disability, my location, and my job, I couldn't do anything. And I want to be here to speak for other members who are like me. I want to be able to be able to offer people advice and hope within their union, but I can't do that because that mechanism is being taken away.
Just what is your work context, Helen? Can you just give us a little bit of an insight of sort of what your engagement is with the profession? I know you introduced yourself at the beginning, but just people who are listening, to give you a bit of a context of what you do and how the union interacts or fits into your work.
Yeah, so I'm a writer, actor, independent self-producer, and I do various other jobs. At the moment, I'm an artistic programmer for a festival. You know, I do lots of different things, and it means that I have no regular routine. It means that I could be away touring at theatre. Predominantly, you're performing at night. Sometimes you do matinee performances, but predominantly you're performing at night. There's no regularity to when or where you're performing. I also live 2 hours away, more than 2 hours away, really, from the nearest physical branch. And on top of that, I'm disabled. And I have a variety of disabilities, which mean that engaging over Zoom on a regular basis just isn't possible on top of my work. I can't commit to turning up at a particular time every week, month, and therefore I cannot engage. It disempowers me. And having spoken to an actor recently who is constantly in work, he said that it's absurd not to have these access facilities because he couldn't. And he's somebody who has profile within the industry, who could be a really good champion for all of the industrial causes that we're talking about. But he can't get involved because the way that the union has migrated to this sort of centralised, disempowered union, it's lost. And that is such a wonderful resource that's lost.
And I think there's so much that the union and specifically the working party that have engaged in this rule change referendum could have learnt from members like yourself, who it's not necessarily part of the rules, but in terms of how the conference is going to evolve and how the branch structure is going to evolve, there's some extended democratic practices and consensus models that we've really successfully trialled over the last 5 years that should be considered in this rule book. And it feels like it's a rule book that's already obsolete before it's even been voted upon.
There's also, it's worth, sorry, Karen.
No, go on, Avyianna.
Just to add that they have also taken out the need to provide a creche at the equity conference, which was a rule in the old rule book, and is probably worth retaining because it's almost hypocritical because equity talks so much about like we have PIPA, that organization, Parents in Performing Arts, about retaining especially women after they've had children. A lot of them end up leaving the industry because they can't find someone to look after the child. So removing the need to provide a creche means that parents may struggle to go to the conference, and it's one of these rules which affects women disproportionately because it does tend to be women that do caring.
Committee meetings as well, other gatherings, network gatherings where you have people who are carers, parents are carers, that is a facility that should be afforded to them to make it truly accessible. Yeah. Otherwise, it's you're just paying lip service to accessibility.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And I think that the reformation of what the conference is going to be and how access is applied to that, and what it says in our rule book tells us about the sorts of people we are. I mean, I sort of think if this rule book was found in the future and it was picked up and someone went, oh, there's this organisation that was called Equity, could they go through that rule book and reenact and reform and reinvent Equity from its rule book? And I worry at the moment that as it stands, there's just too many things missing. Which brings us on to point 10, which is the last of the statements of approval. Some of these points, when you read through them, like, we've obviously got opinions, and I hope we've shared with you those opinions in a context that might give you a few things to go and have a look at the rule book and go, well, what does it say in the rule book? And on the website page, so I'll put it up on screen again, there are links to the old rule book, there's links to the new rule book, there's links to this document, there's links to the outline of what has changed, which is the substantive changes that are listed in the back of this document. But feeling that you can look through as far as you can on one thing that you feel might be a deal breaker could be the thing that makes you decide you want to vote it through or call a pause, because that's really what the no vote is. It's about putting a pause in the process. So
I would just like to clarify that, and I'm not sure that is necessarily being advertised. I would suggest that most people, if not all people, who are voting no are not voting no because they don't want rule changes. They're voting no because they want it to be done in a much more democratic way with greater oversight, then have it passed through. This is not we don't want anything to change. We do want things to change, but we want them to change in the right, fair way.
So, yes, rule number 10 is about, the list of structural rules that can only be changed by referendum no longer exists, which again I keep saying this, we're taking power away from the people, because rules that they would have had to put out to referendum to get everybody's opinion on it, that they no longer have to do that. They can change it without having to go to the referendum. But of course, the right of council to put any rule change passed by Equity Conference to referendum has been retained. What that means, in effect, is that if something should pass at conference with a 2/3 majority, what that means is that then it becomes equity policy. If something passes at conference with a 2/3 majority, the council have to accept it. Not anymore, because they can put it out to a referendum, which means if something passes they don't like, they are retaining the right to put it out to referendum, which means they have much more control, because the council can urge people to vote whatever way they want. They can present the rule, whatever it is, the motion, they can present the motion however they want. They have control over the literature that gets printed, how we all talk about it, which it retains their right
access to the entire database,
which means they can email every member urging a vote. As we've seen with this referendum, every member has been emailed and they've been told or urged to vote yes, which doesn't seem terribly fair. And they have access to the members' funds to do this, and we don't. Also, one of the rights which we've lost, which is not in the new rulebook, is it used to be the case in the old rulebook that you have to include a statement for and a statement against. As we can see here, both statements are included. That's not in the new rulebook. So technically they could put something to referendum and only include a statement for. There's actually nothing in the rules which says you have to have a statement against. So just that's something else to be aware of.
The interpretations, because I've heard a lot about the change and shift in power, and I kind of felt that instinctively by reading the information that was given at the beginning and then seeing the minutiae breakdown that John Carnegie very kindly, and with Terry Victor and a team of those people who were really tuned into the rules. Where was it that you found your understanding of that power shift? Because I haven't really been able to articulate it in the way that you and Helen have. The two of you have really opened my eyes and helped me understand which rules in the power structure are changing. I mean, for me, I had a problem with the Rule U and Rule T, which are the conference, and it's how the branch interacts with it, because that's a big part of my extended members' participation. So where was the power struggle for you illuminated?
It's the removal of Rule 40.2. That's the referendum rule, if anyone wants to look. How did I find out? I just read it and it became apparent through reading it. And I've had conversations with Mr. Carnegie and with other people that are well informed, and I guess I just went through it. And the more you start looking at each rule and picking bits out, you do it, as Helen said earlier, collectively, it builds up a picture. One rule which shifts power, you might think, well, okay, fair enough. But when there's so many rules which shift power, each of them in a small way, but it adds up to quite a big shift in power. And I noticed it as I was reading. And then I started, once you start noticing something, you start looking for it, and then you see more examples, and then you go, oh my God.
I would say the same. I knew very little about the rules, and so had no sort of preconceptions, got the summary through, and had a read through it, interested to see what was going to happen, what was going to change. And I consider myself averagely intelligent, and it became really apparent really quickly that there was just subtle uses of language. There's no great overt, we're just going to shift everything. It was just subtle uses of language as you started to scroll down each of the summary points, which then made you go, oh, wait a minute. And you read again, and it became quite clear that there were either vagaries included in it, which allowed for a multitude of flexibility for staff and council to act, or there were language changes that just actively do change where the power
Well,
is.
even like there's a new
Something
phrase
less.
which has appeared in the rulebook now, decided by council from time to time. That's a phrase which appears consistently throughout the new rulebook. And I
That
was just struck by the number of times this phrase appears and the number of things which are suddenly decided by council from time to time is so wonderfully vague. Could mean anything. But yeah, just the number of things that are now decided by council.
I'm baffled that a legal body looked at that term and went, "Yeah, that's perfectly sufficient to be in rules."
Yeah. So there's those 10 points. So under the union's new rules, there's 10 points. We have a statement of approval, which this is the statement that council feel that is the convincer for you to decide that your vote should be yes.
I'd like to point out that actually there's not a unanimous opinion on council. I've spoken to a couple of councillors who actually are voting no. I won't name any names, but it's being presented as a unanimous decision. The council says vote yes. They don't actually, not all of them.
So, and it's really important that the membership know that, so that they can feel that there is a mixed opinion within council, and also perhaps take inference from the fact that these councillors don't feel able to speak publicly.
Well, quite. Why do they not feel able to come forward?
I mean, I think it is hard when you're on the yes side and everything that's been done is in how you think it should be done and you don't have any objection to it. Being able to see the flip side and have a constructive debate and conversation about it seems to be very, very hard. I found it very hard to find people who agreed with the rules and weren't just really kind of, what do you mean you don't trust us? It's no one's ever kind of logically said the things.
I think it's become a sort of almost passive aggressive sort of oh well, you just don't like the General Secretary on a personal level or something, and people seem unable to refute my actual argument, the content of my argument, rather than making sort of statements about, oh, you've got a vendetta against somebody personally.
I mean, it
is not the case.
It does. It breaks my soul to having to be recording this podcast, recording this show. But I really thought it was important for us who, I mean, we wouldn't have known each other if it was not for the union. That is the thing we all have in common.
I love my union. I think that's worth saying, because I know I sound very negative, but I do, and I have your best interests at heart, and I love my members. I do.
And when you're working full time, often, I mean, as for me, I had no time to take part in union business because I was constantly working. And gradually, as my workflow has changed and I've had a bit more time in my schedule to be able to look back at how I want to feed back into the union and back into the industry.
I would argue that that's because you weren't given an accessible facility that fit in with your working life in order to engage with the union.
I mean, as well, branches weren't really applicable because I was never in one place. So I didn't understand that the union even had a branch structure for a long time. I ended up on committees because industrially, the people who I was engaging with, who got me into my membership and then said to me, would you like to come and join? Would you like to be elected, or would you come and join a committee meeting to see what goes on? I was like, oh yeah, I'd be interested. And then they'd go, haha, we've got you. So my participation with the union has always been very, very industrial. Being part of the ITC negotiation team. I'm very proud of the fact that stage managers getting paid driving time, I don't know if it's still in the contract, was one of my ideas. I can look at several of the industrial contracts and know that ideas that I put forward at a negotiation time have made it into contracts. And that is, actually quite, that's quite a powerful position and a powerful contribution to be able to make to your industry.
And I think we're all really sad that we have to be here having this discussion.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's not something that any of us have really had the time for, nor had the desire to do. It's something we felt forced to do because we've been pushed into a corner. We've been pushed into being silenced because we have questions. And it goes to my
And I think
interactions with counsellors have been very, very defensive and aggressive.
Mm.
And that's
I
not
think
why
we've almost been
counsel.
I think we've been demonized for asking questions. A sort of, oh, you're a troublemaker seems to be the attitude. When, I mean, you can't expect that you're going to, impose a rule book and people aren't going to have questions about it.
We're a
if you-
union and we're about protesting, and that doesn't just happen outside of the union.
If you're in the workplace and you try and get stuff done, rather than being called a troublemaker, they'll often say, "Oh yeah, but you're the trade unionist."
Mm.
And that troublemaker and trade unionist, when we are on the shop floor, often are interchangeable. We are the ones that stand up for our hourly rights, whether we get our overnight break, whether we get our tea break, whether, we are the ones that are often, the members that have non-members around us, and we have a sense of duty to make sure the contract is carried out to the letter.
Questioning on behalf of the little people should not be demonized.
Absolutely.
So how do we wrap this up? We haven't even come to the statement of disapproval.
No, but we've already been going over an hour.
We've already gone for an hour. Maybe we will conclude this and we will have a discussion about whether we decide to do another show which looks at the disapproval side. But it was really important that we didn't start with that. We wanted to look at the statement in favour and what it is that we're having to decide whether we agree or not, and the people that want us to agree, what they're laying out for us to make those decisions on. And I think one of the things I've been a little bit disturbed by with the sentiment that's come out is sometimes the way they're steering with passive aggressive. And I think this is a perfect example of you're reading something and then they throw something in that's a little bit itchy. The current rulebook is a liability causing unnecessary expense to the union, since its lack of clarity means that it requires frequent adjustments and often legal interpretation. Most of all, it is hard to understand for grassroots members. The council wants to ensure that equity has rules that are acceptable, easily understood and progressive, empowering us to fight for our members as effectively as we can. Our current rules, often by accident, make this task hard. But simplicity, if we had a Janet and John book, it doesn't have many words, but it's not exactly a work of art.
Well, I think the argument that's often made that the kind of yes side keep making is that this new rule book has fewer words, as if that in itself is a positive. And it isn't necessarily a positive, because clarity often means spelling everything out and having perhaps even more words for clarity. So having fewer words doesn't equal clarity.
Yes. So you will have received your magazine. You will have received...
Which has a lovely cover.
It has, on a ballot paper.
Very nice, very nice.
This is a vote that is taking place both digitally and paper. So it does actually give you instructions of how to vote online. Yes, it does.
And you must vote
you
before
can check your
2nd
inbox.
December, I think.
Yeah. So the deadline is the 2nd of December, 12 noon. And the online has been sent to your inbox. So if you search for Popularis in your search criteria for your email,
it may be in your junk folder as well.
And also check your spam folder. And if not, just email the union to send you a new link. And lots of people have actually done that. So this is your rule book, or this is the guide to the referendum. It is what it is. It is what you have. And I think to finish, rather than it being me,
I was just going to ask Karen if you could just let members know what their options are if they have changed their mind on how they have voted.
I will insert this, and then I'm going to give the two of you the last word. But if you do find that you have voted and you realise you should have voted the other way, because we have a digital vote and a paper vote, if you have voted digitally, you can submit your paper vote. It will not change your vote, but will invalidate the one that you made. So you will become a spoiled paper.
Yes, that's right.
So if you voted once and you are happy with your vote, that is cool. If you realise that actually you'd like to put a little bit of a breaker on it and you wish you'd voted no, you can vote again, but it will invalidate the vote that you made, not give you a no vote. So you've got this in front of you for the first time. Avyianna, what advice do you give to a member who is going to read both statements and make a decision of whether they're going to vote yes or no?
I have voted no, and I would encourage members to vote against this, not because we don't want change, but so that we can put the brakes on it, slow the whole process down. And in 2023, let's take a look at this properly. Let's engage a wider membership in the discussion. Let's not rush the whole thing to referendum in 2 weeks, which is ridiculous. And let's just slow down and take a look at it again in 2023 properly. So vote no.
Helen?
I would agree with Avyianna that this is absolutely necessary, but this process has been wrong and that we need to approach it in a different, more democratic way. I would ask that you inform yourself as best you can. And that means talking to a variety of different people, as well as trying to read the summary or the rules if you possibly have time. And if you don't have time for any of that, maybe you would take a look at the videos that I produced, just to give yourself as much information. I think whenever it comes to something that is so enormous as this is, there can't be too much information. You can't have too much of one side or another. I think you have to feel solid in your how informed you are before you make this decision. So please feel free to get in touch with any of us, and we would chat through things with you. And make sure that you're aware that there are consequences to your decision that we might not be aware of yet, because the process has been so shortened. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Avyianna and Helen, for joining me. We may do a no vote or a disapproval video, but this is the one that we really wanted to look at, that approval vote, so that when you're looking through it, you've got a little bit of extra companionship to be able to make that decision. So thank you very much, and I will bring this to a close.